Welcome to Inside London Study Abroad Session, the podcast where global education meets the real world impact. Today's guest is Matt Khoury, a co-founder and CEO of LOKE, the tech platform powering digital loyalty and ordering for hospitality giants like Nando's and Shake Shack. With a background in economics and project management, Matt has built and scaled startups across 3 continents, always with an eye on technology that can transform customers' experience. Into this episode, we'll explore what makes graduates truly workplace ready, how international exposure fuels innovation, and what universities can learn from startup world when it comes to preparing students for fast-moving industries. Well, welcome, Matt. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be chatting with you guys and hopefully can help and provide some inspirational feedback to your questions.
Super. We have a few questions for you, more challenges really, and we're going to start with the first one. Matthew, you built LOKE into a global tech platform that sells brands like Nando's already mentioned. From your perspective, do graduates entering tech or hospitality understand how to apply what they've learned? Or does that practical commercial awareness still need to be built on the job? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I always have quite a controversial view when it comes to, university education versus real world experience. I personally have done both, completed, my honors in Australia, but also have started multiple companies, including multiple tech companies, and now we're talking about LOKE today. From seeing firsthand the challenges of transitioning from your academic education to first world principles is very different. And we see these challenges coming out from students that do work for us as well. The university will teach students around data analysis, marketing principles, software design, things that come straight out of a textbook, which is all good and proper. That creates intelligent people, and that's what we want as a foundation. But nothing really beats real world experience, right? Understanding the commercial application of what they're learning and how that impacts from a revenue perspective, from a margin perspective, from a cost perspective. How do we retain clients? How do we scale globally? And these things really change so much on a day-to-day basis that it's very difficult to be able to apply a theoretical principle into a practical principle. So what we try and do is provide some structured mentorship and as much exposure to clients, cross-functional training as we can, to help these intelligent thinkers think more about how do we grow revenue and how do we brand and loyalty amongst them high.
Makes sense. I mean, in today's world, it's very difficult to find a perfect skills, right, among the graduates. So, so how do you stand out in a crowded graduate market? You do work with some of the most recognizable retail and hospitality brands who you
Yes.
hire when you hire people, right? When you hire young talent, what does the candidate stand out? What does it make him to stand out or her stand out?
Yeah.
And does the international experience play a part, do you think?
Yes. Good question. I think I heard Zuckerberg state this once in an interview and it really resonated with me. If you can see yourself working for this person in their field of experience, then that is the ideal hire that you want, right? So, in addition to that, you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And it's a very cliche thing to say, but the reality of the situation is you want to hire people that can educate you. That's what creates a good team. You want to educate each other, you want to collaborate, and you want to drive forward together. You want to have a shared purpose. So having a degree is important. And, if you've done well at your degree, fantastic, you've got good marks. But what we also want to see is, have you got work experience? Have you got self-awareness, right? Do you have international exposure? Because the more that you go out into the world, understand who you are, what your purpose is, understand different cultures, belief systems, you're able to work those systems better, understand their pain points and their needs, navigate them, and provide innovative solutions to their problems, which ultimately is what drives that innovation and growth for the company. So we're looking for people that have gone over and above just their university degree and are thinking more about the real world education from travel, international exposure, and also, they might have their own startups or internships or have been involved in extracurricular activities outside of their university degree.
It's great. It's important for everyone being out there to have multiple exposures, and there is always a career outcomes and employability pressure, especially today, which we find that there is a lot of employability is much difficult. You found and scale up multiple startups. What real world skills do you think, maybe entrepreneurial mindset, do you think universities should prioritize?
Well, I think that Harvard did a study recently across all entrepreneurs to find what were the common traits. And the number one thing was the disruptive behavior, right? Um, Questioning the norms, right? Thinking outside the box, not following what someone tells you, but thinking differently. That's something that's hard to teach and definitely not being taught well within universities, right? How do you get that out of a textbook? So it's really important to provide real world examples to these students by getting them out into the workforce or providing them project based learning that allows them to understand and see the application of their work and the limitations of that and how to think differently in order to be able to solve those, in order to really drive resilience, commercial awareness, execution discipline, and how to ensure that we are achieving those number one goals, which is how do we drive revenue, how do we keep customers happy. So it's all about how do we provide a better learning mechanism for students outside of the textbook application that they're getting right now.
It's interesting because this is a fast moving world. There's a lot of things that are changing as we speak, and of course universities are trying to keep up as we do it. And for graduates to thrive in the fast-moving industries and the tech digital marketing, this is a good insight what to do. Do you think, like Loke, partners with banks and POS providers and global brands? If it was up to you, Matt, if it was up to you, imagine a scenario. If you could design a university partnership that genuinely prepares students for the tech and the startup world, what would it look like? What kind of collaborations perhaps you could make an academic project feel more real? Your take on it.
What I loved about Singapore, because we do a lot of cities there, is the way that the government does with a venture arm. And I believe that the education system lacks this also. So if we could have essentially like an accelerator or incubator program within the universities where they weren't lecturers, so to speak, or they are lecturers, but in this specific program, they were more like venture mentors. How do we take an idea and how do we commercialize that idea? And what are the risks that we're going to face and how do we overcome them? Everything from how do we raise money? How do we prepare the documentation to raise money? How do we sell? How do we interact with clients? How do we then go and deal with the finances and forecasting, but actually provide partnerships with corporate organizations or projects in real world examples to let them fail and let them learn from that failing, because they're not able to do that currently. And that's where it falls down. You take the theoretical principle and you apply it into the real world, and they haven't necessarily been able to apply it, to fail, to learn from it. So we're missing that entrepreneurial spirit and mentorship within the university. So I think collaboration between the corporate industry and venture arms to work on projects like that would be much more beneficial for the students.
So you sound like a perfect person to be approached by universities with design a course that's sort of a more practical with your experience, of course. And, expectations have been evolving, right? Especially post-pandemic. Things have been changing the last 4 years now. Pandemic completely transformed digital adaptation hospitality. You might have seen that, of course,
Yeah.
yourself, and change how perhaps young people think about work themselves because, remote work and such. But have you noticed yourself a shift in what employees or interns perhaps value? Flexibility, creativity, impact, anything.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a big shift, as everyone has been able to tell, of course. And Loke was an innovator with this, because we looked at, from international exposure, we looked at the Nordic countries and looked at, the happiest countries and the most productive countries in the world. And the Nordic countries absolutely nail this, right? Whereby they look at, from it right through to the workplace, they don't look at things as a 9 to 5 role, right? They look at things more as a project based situation. Okay. We have a
Yes.
purpose. We work together on a project based way. How do we achieve that purpose? And how do we create fulfillment and happiness in achieving that? So, before the pandemic, Loke actually implemented a flexible remote working environment where our team could work from wherever they wanted. They could clock in and clock out in the times most suitable for them, as long as they're delivering on their expectations over and above. That we're growing, the clients are happy, they're achieving their KPIs, and that worked very well for us. So we were very lucky to have that implemented prior to COVID. COVID came, and as people were forced to work from home and the remote working culture boomed, people started to recognize that they wanted more out of their workplace than purely promotions, right? So pre-COVID, it's all about hierarchy. How do I get to the top level position and make the most amount of money? And that comes at a very big personal and professional sacrifice, right? People doing things that they don't necessarily like, or coming at the sacrifice of time with their family or their mental health balance. So now what we see is much more around the new generations going, I want purpose, I want to be happy, and I want to have financial freedom. And what that means is flexibility, right? It allows them to work from home with their families or come to the office and have that social interaction. It allows them to go on their vacations if they need to, or even work from a different country. But what they need is structure and accountability, and we need transparency, right? So as long as you can govern those well, and you can implement very impactful social networking between your teams and ensure that you allow for that camaraderie and build that purpose, you're going to have a much happier environment for your team to work in, and you're going to get much better results doing so. So we've seen a big trend in the industry in doing that, not just our industry, all industries globally, but there are some pain points. And if you can't govern those principles well, people have found that actually some people become less productive, right? And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
a lot of organizations like Musk are trying to bring people back into the office. But I guess at a certain size, it becomes much harder to manage such a large workforce.
Yeah, it is. It is true. I mean, it depends on the industry. It's been very difficult to bring people into work, and some, of course, in some industries are different. So, there's something we've been asking employers, and we just to find what the take is on the skills that are needed. Do you think there is a necessity for to emphasize more soft skills across the board, from the new graduates?
So when you are referring to soft skills, what exactly are you asking?
I'm asking you and I having a conversation, having an interview, approaching a client in person rather than online, having that sort of ability to have a sort of an interaction with them without in need of internet.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Obviously, we're all addicted to hardware and technology these days, which has improved connection in a scalable way, but
Yes.
decreased human connection. And one of the key things that we try to teach is that sales and the ability to connect with the people that you are dealing with, whether it be from hiring the best talent, raising capital, selling into prospects, retaining clients, upselling clients, cross selling. All of this requires human interaction. And if you are an extrovert or you haven't had exposure doing that, it can be quite daunting. So a
Yes.
lot of the university students that we meet, that I do a lot of advisory to, or the people that we've hired, they feel scared
or they have fear in jumping into the deep end and dealing with those situations. So yes, it's really important that those soft skills are learnt within university. And that's why I believe this partnership and more of a incubator mentorship with corporates to throw them into projects and throw them into the deep end where they can learn firsthand and deal firsthand with these people is absolutely important. And if their university is not providing that, I strongly recommend that people go and get work during their university degree. So I remember when I did my course, my lecturer was stating to us, do not go get a job, focus purely on your degree. You shouldn't be working at all. And I thought that was, not the best advice.
Yeah.
Because by the time I finished my university degree, I already reached the most senior position within the industry that I was wanting to work in. And when people in my class had finished, they started purely as a graduate, right at the bottom position. So that really gave me a step up, and it gave me real world life experience and allowed me to make more money early and be disruptive, which is what the entrepreneurial spirit is about.
It's a great insight. Thank you, Matt, because it is something that, we've been so trying to find out. I'm sure there is no one perfect recipe for everyone. And, your experience yourself and what you've went through, especially, your initiator of your own work and your job, because, you know, you, you're a global founder, right? You founded your own businesses. In your point of view, what is the real return of investment of studying abroad? How does international exposure help someone think more strategically or even in an innovative, better in tech business, like Loke, for instance?
So, I guess a passionate topic of mine. I believe that travel, in most cases, is more important than your university degree. Now,
Hmm.
education is number one. You always need to be learning, but you can self-learn, right? Some people require a more structured environment. Fantastic. Go to university. There's specific degrees that you couldn't get a job with unless you completed them. Let's say medical, right? So completely understand that it's important for specific industries. However, throwing yourself into another country from any age, but particularly at a young age, allows you to navigate a system which it could have completely opposing views to your ideologies and the value and belief system that you have grown up in, whether it be from your family, social network, or from the government, right? So when you are there, you are needing to learn a whole new environment, perspective, and what makes people tick and drive and have purpose. And once you go to enough countries and you navigate all of these different cultural systems, you start to understand the differing views and opinions, personally and professionally, which then, when you are making business decisions, you're able to see gaps that other people can't see and they become natural to you. You're able to communicate effectively in a way that other people cannot communicate because you're needing to get different languages and perspectives to understand you in their cultural environment. So, absolutely, the international travel and studying abroad is the first and foremost that I would always advocate for. Once you are also overseas and you have broken out of the norms in which create your status or identity, and you realize that that actually is meaningless to what your purpose should be, you can then start to evaluate yourself and your decision making in a non emotional capacity, which is always the best way when making business decisions. Okay. So, what you want to do is you want to take yourself out of your normal environment, put yourself into a completely different environment, learn who you are as an individual, learn the cultures around you, and then be able to step up above all those values and belief systems to deliver innovation in a disruptive way.
Great insight. And frankly, it's something I personally think about. It's like putting yourself in the most uncomfortable position and test yourself in a way, outside your security and, just make yourself insecure for a while. And it's a great insight because it's especially in a world where being entrepreneur, right? You have had so many barriers, right? So many barriers across your career, and then you managed to go through it. How many times you yourself, Matt, have been in this situation, right? You've
Yes.
but you persevered. You just plow through, just next. So
Yeah.
this is a great insight, and I hope people listening to this will take some of it. And our last question to you is really, what is your question to our next guest? Our next guest, it's going to be a student. So tell me, if it was a student listening to this, what question would you like to ask?
Okay. So, as a student who is listening to this, I believe that the most important thing when trying to create financial freedom and or success is understanding what is your passion and what is your purpose, right? Once you can find your passion, ask yourself, how do I create a business or work for an organization that allows me to follow my passion and then be able to create financial freedom through that journey? So ask yourself, what is your passion and how can you achieve that purpose?
That's great. This is great. Thank you very much for the conversation. Today's episode of Inside the London Study Abroad session. Huge thank you to Matt. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. You are probably the archetypal, for me at least personally, archetypal startup that started from scratch and make it to where you are today. For our audience, if you're a university leader, student, or employer tuning in, we hope this conversation sparks some new ideas about education and industry, how they can both collaborate in more meaningful way. So thank you again, Matt.
Glad to
And
contribute.
my pleasure. And tune next time and to our next Inside the London Study Abroad. My name was Maciek, and I'm your host. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.